Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the GRIPS Forum. My name is Narushige Michita. I teach International Security Affairs at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS, based in Tokyo. I'll be serving as your host today. Unfortunately, the world is full of actual and potential conflicts. Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues. The situation in Syria and Yemen is precarious. In Asia, North Korea and China continue to strengthen their nuclear and missile capabilities. In fact, Japan decided to strengthen or to almost double its defense budget last year in order to deal with the more challenging strategic environment in this region. What are the places in the world where conflicts are taking place or are likely to take place? Why are they happening? And what can we do to prevent or terminate those conflicts? Today, we have invited Dr. Comfort Iro, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group, to answer these questions. Dr. Iro was appointed Crisis Group's President and CEO in 2021. She joined the organization as West Africa Project Director in 2001 and became African Program Director later, and then Interim Vice President before she took up the current position. Dr. Iro has spent her entire career working on or in conflict-affected countries. In between her two tenures at Crisis Group, she served as Political Affairs Officer and Policy Advisor to the Special Representative of the Secretary General, United Nations Mission in Liberia between 2004 and 2007, and as Deputy Africa Program Director for the International Center for Transitional Justice between 2008 and 2010. Dr. Iro has a PhD from the London School of Economics, University of London. I will ask Dr. Iro to speak for about 30 minutes, and we will open the screen for Q&A and discussion after that. The presentation and discussion in this session will be on the record. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Iro.
Thank you very much, Vice President. It's a real pleasure to be with everybody at GRIPS today, those within GRIPS and those also invited to the session as well. And it's really an important moment to be talking to all of you. I'd like to, on behalf of Crisis Group, congratulate Japan on joining the UN Security Council. And I and my colleagues look forward to working with all of you over the next 2 years at this important moment in international relations as well. And our discussion that we're having today is taking place at such an important moment. Many of the issues and conflicts that you've already outlined, Mr. Vice President, will be covered in my presentation, and they're certainly relevant right now as Japan takes over the Security Council. And it's a really important platform at GRIPS to be discussing world affairs today as well. So thank you very much. Most of you, I hope, would have already seen the 10 conflicts commentary that we put out on the 1st of January in partnership with the Foreign Policy magazine. And if you haven't seen it, I'm sure we'll be able to distribute it with you. What I want to do in the 30 minutes that I've got with you all this morning from where I'm speaking from, I'd like to sort of cover some of the sort of key what I see is the sort of key issues that are coming out of the 10 conflicts, the sort of the key headlines of that presentation, and what we consider as the 10 conflicts worth watching, important to watch over the next year. That is not to say that those conflicts that we've put on the agenda, or the conflicts that are not on the 10 conflicts, that's not to say that they're not important or relevant. But these are the 10 conflicts that we believe international actors engaged in peace and security should be watching. I should also say that having done these 10 conflicts from Crisis Group, having done it since about 2012, what is very important, or what is relevant about this particular list, is that it's it's the post 9/11 countries that are featuring on our list. So if you'll recall, those of you who've been watching international relations for the last 10 years, many of the countries that we had on our list in the past 10 years have sort of been related to the war and terror. Those countries that came out of 9/11, whether it's Syria or Iraq or Libya, for example. That's not to say that we're out of the dilemmas in those countries, but that's just to note that the significance is that a number of the countries that are on here are not part of that sort of war and terror countries. And in a sense, what binds all these countries that are on the list together, it's a sense that in which we've sort of gone back to the future. A number of the conflicts that we're dealing here are either internationalized civil wars, or there are interstate crises that we're dealing with. And it's a real mark of the time where I think we really do need to ask ourselves a number of questions about the future of peace and security, but more importantly, the future of conflict prevention and early warning as we go forward. The 10 countries that we are dealing with, Ukraine obviously tops the headline. It was certainly on the headline of our 10 conflicts to watch last year. I mean, a number of people often ask whether we rank our 10 conflicts from 1 to 10 in a particular order. We don't do that, but it's not a surprise that Ukraine is at the top of our list as well. And then the other countries on our list, Ethiopia, which was also on our list last year. Iran is on our list also, and it was on our list last year also in terms of regional security concerns that we had with Israel and the rest of the region. We've also got Azerbaijan, Armenia on our list, Haiti, Yemen, Taiwan, Pakistan, the Sahel, and the Great Lakes. And I'll be happy to take questions in relation to all of these at the end of my conversation. So one of the big question this year, or the big issue that we're focusing on since the invasion by Russia into Ukraine last February, is to understand and to continue to look and to assess what the implications are of the war in Ukraine and what the global ramifications are of Russia's invasion in Ukraine. And I think one of the big messages, one of the big takeaways from Crisis Group is that this war, this invasion by Russia, has cast a long shadow over global affairs. On the one hand, I think it's worth noting that on the one hand, for Russia, this war so far has been disastrous. An offensive that was supposed to see Russia take over Ukraine, see the assumption that Russia made was that the West would be weakened, that it would be able to trample into Ukraine, and that it will be able to strengthen the Kremlin. All those assumptions that President Putin and those close to him made have not come to being. In fact, we've seen the opposite happened. What we've seen over the last year is that it has turbocharged, accelerated Ukraine's nationalism. It has pushed Kyiv closer to Europe, and it has breathed a new purpose, a new life into NATO. Most of you who will be watching the politics of NATO, who had been watching the politics of sort of alliance in the last few years will recall that President Macron himself had suggested that NATO was brain dead, and President Trump himself had almost cast NATO into irrelevance. And suddenly what we've seen in the last year or so is that NATO has gained a new breath of life and is at the center of much of the thinking about the future of peace and security as a result of the invasion as well. But having said that, and having said that, that this war has so far been disastrous for Russia, on the other hand, however, is that Russia's economy has nonetheless managed to adapt to the massive Western sanctions that we have seen so far. The Kremlin itself appears convinced that Russia has staying power, despite what we've seen with the Russian army. It's also very clear to us that Moscow might still force an ugly settlement and a set of troubling precedents against Ukraine. And I think we're watching very carefully, because if Russia was able to impose that kind of settlement on Ukraine, it will set a dangerous precedent of aggression elsewhere. The other issue as well is that if President Putin feels his back further against the wall and he feels imperiled by Ukraine, if he feels that due to Ukraine's further advances, or if he sees other reasons, a more emboldened Europe, a more emboldened Western alliance, it's not impossible, though we do think it's unlikely, and we emphasize that in the 10 conflicts to watch. But it's not impossible, however, to completely rule out that he may still use nuclear weapons as a last roll of the dice as well. So we're keeping an eye on the nuclear escalation and the politics around the use of nuclear weapons as well. But what is clear to us, Mr. Vice President, is that whatever happens in Ukraine in 2023, the Western Russia and its alliances will likely remain a miscalculation away from confrontation. So this explains why sort of Ukraine is right at the top of our watch list, and also informs the introduction that we give to the watch list as well. I think the other issue that we're looking at very carefully, largely as a consequence of Ukraine and largely as a ramification of Ukraine, is what the invasion means for China. As you'll recall, going into the invasion, there was already, regardless of Ukraine, there was already heightened competition between China and the US particularly. And it's been interesting to watch what the Russia's invasion into Ukraine means for China. And our assessment, as we highlighted in the 10 conflicts, is that the invasion of Russia into Ukraine has mostly been a headache for Beijing. And despite President Xi Jinping's public embrace of President Putin, and also despite the continued trade between the country that has also helped Russia cope with the sanctions, it's very clear to us that Beijing's material support to Moscow has been lackluster. Also, it's worth bearing in mind that China has not sent weapons into Russia, and President Xi Jinping appears disturbed, unsettled by President Putin's travails and the nuclear bluster. You'll recall that on the eve, in the lead up to the G20 summit, both Chancellor Scholz and President Xi Jinping had been very clear that they are very concerned about the talk of a nuclear escalation. And Beijing does not want to, while Beijing does not want to undercut Moscow and is unlikely to compel President Putin to reach a peace settlement, he neither wishes to provoke Western capitals or continue to do anything that will exacerbate tensions with the West as well. And that is, I think that's one observation worth watching. So first observation is that this has been disastrous for President Putin. Nonetheless, he still remains emboldened. And third, China sees this invasion as mostly a headache for its own foreign policy diplomacy as well. And it's partly explains why we've put Taiwan on the list of our 10 conflicts. We do see that the war has heightened fears of a Chinese assault on Taiwan, but, and I really do want to emphasize this, but an invasion that we believe seems too risky for Beijing in the near term, and even before the war, seems for now even less likely as well. So even though it's on our list of things to watch, we put it on our list of things to watch because we see it as part of the geopolitics, but we do not see it as likely in the near term to see some kind of assault on Taiwan. And also the reason why we see it as less likely is that the massive sanctions imposed on Russia has not been lost on China, nor has Moscow's battlefields failures. But, and the reason why we did put it on the list is that the war has also not changed the fundamentals of the US-China relationship, and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan accelerated those tensions as well. And of course, the competition between the US and China is still baked in the two countries' foreign policy. And also China's own designs on Taiwan are not going away anytime soon. So this is also why we've put it on the list as well, because we likely see also some kind of miscalculation, some kind of misinterpretation of each side's own ambitions in the region as well. The other trend, Mr. Vice President, that I think we should keep an eye on over the next year is that the war, the invasion by Russia into Ukraine has shone a light on another trend, my fifth trend. It's shone a light on non-Western middle power influence and autonomy. So what has been interesting is to watch the role of certain key countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, India as well. And I would also say it's worth watching this year, although it's not on our 10 conflicts to watch, but I would keep an eye on Brazil. And when we launch our European Union Global Watch List on the 1st of February, this Wednesday, you'll notice that we've put Brazil on that particular list because we do think that it's a country of importance to the European Union. But in terms of non-Western middle power influence and autonomy, and I would even add Japan on there, given your role over the next 2 years on the Security Council, and also because Japan is in the midst of redefining its own sort of national security posture as well. So I would even include your country there in terms of your economic and political heft going forward and the decisions that you're making. But in the 10 conflicts, we highlighted Turkey, particularly in Saudi Arabia and India. I think Turkey is a crucial country to watch for those of you who are Turkey experts and looking at its own foreign policy. Crucially, this year is an election year for Turkey as well. And Turkey played a significant role also in negotiating key decisions in relation to Ukraine. Turkey is walking what we consider a very tight rope between its membership of NATO and its ties with Moscow. And you'll remember that last year it brokered a significant deal. It brokered the Black Sea grain deal alongside the Secretary General for the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, as well. And the role that President Erdogan, continues to play in a number of other places where Russia is also crucial, Mr. Vice President, Syria being one of those, I think will be crucial to watch over the next year or so. The other middle power that we shine a light on in the presentation is in the 10 conflicts is Saudi Arabia. And of course, Saudi Arabia has seen its oil boom increase as a result of the abrupt removal of Russia's own oil from the international markets as well. And I think one of the highlights for Riyadh last year was that it managed to force a visit from President Biden to Riyadh, who, when he offered, you remember when he came into office and as part of his own campaign back in 2020, he promised to shun the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And Riyadh also decided with other oil producers to keep oil prices high, much to Washington's annoyance as well. So I think, as a result of the OPEC Plus decision, Saudi Arabia feels particularly emboldened, and it has been also working with Turkey closely in negotiating prisoner swaps between Ukraine and Russia as well. And the third country, we would say middle power worth watching, and a very close neighbor, regional player in your backyard, Mr. Vice President, is India. At once a security partner with the US, but also a major purchaser of Russian arms. It's played a very pragmatic role vis-a-vis retaining that relationship with Russia, maintaining that security relationship with the US, and being part of AUKUS with the US as well. And I think one of the conclusions that I would say, Mr. Vice President, in terms of the trend lines that we've been watching over the few months, is that although there's been a lot of concerns about a major rift between the West and non-aligned countries, or countries that are called the Global South countries, one of the observations that we make is that there's no coordinated, non-aligned movement. But what we see instead is that the activist middle powers, certainly in this current geopolitical space, they do feel that there's growing space for them now today to chart their own course of action, and that while a number of them are concerned about the big power rivalry and potential miscalculation and further instability, nonetheless, they see an opportunity that this multi-polarity brings. And as I said, Turkey charting its own course, Saudi Arabia charting its own course for itself, seeing itself as an important ally to a number of countries in the Global South, Brazil being seen as a significant regional player in its own backyard, and playing an important role in terms of international environmental and climatic issues. And of course, Japan also having a strong view in terms of regional peace and security in Asia and the Pacific region as well. So that's sort of the big trend lines that we see, how the invasion has cast a shadow over geopolitics, how this has so far been a disastrous war for Russia, yet at the same time, Russia hasn't found itself undermined significantly by the Western sanctions. Nonetheless, we are still concerned and keeping an eye on nuclear escalation, how China has found this to be a headache. Nonetheless, it still sees Taiwan as an important concern in terms of its own competition with the US, and also how we've seen the rise of activist middle powers. Nonetheless, we don't see a coordinated, non-aligned movement. So that's the sort of big trend lines that we see internationally. I just want to zoom in the 10 minutes that I have or so remaining, Mr. Vice President, to talk about some of the conflicts that we do discuss in the 10 conflicts as well. I've already mentioned Taiwan. The ones that I mean, if you were to ask me what is keeping me awake at night right now, what is of importance or what is pertinent to me right now, there's two conflicts really that are on our list that we see as both worrying if they should backslide, but also as we see as an opportunity if we can ensure international actors are able to assert their own influence on guaranteeing the peace processes in these countries, and that's Ethiopia and Yemen. Last year, in the midst of the crisis in Ukraine, we saw two truces, both in Ethiopia and Yemen. But worryingly and very sadly, we also saw that truce completely collapse in Ethiopia, and we also saw that it was very difficult to get a new settlement, a new truce in Yemen as well. So we've put them both on our list this year, Mr. Vice President, because we do see both concern, but we also see opportunities as well. For Ethiopia specifically, we see an opportunity with the two recent agreements that were signed, both in Pretoria, and then also supplemented again in Nairobi. The two recent agreements have brought an end to the fighting for now, a very horrific war that took the lives of thousands of Ethiopians. Nonetheless, we do see two questions that remain unresolved. And we do underline in the 10 conflicts that anything could go wrong with this peace settlement. Much depends, on the one hand, on the willingness of the Eritrean troops to completely withdraw from the country, and also on the other hand, for the Tigrayan forces to continue disarming from the region as well. So I think that's one development that we see worth watching as well. Nonetheless, we do see significant material improvement for the people of Tigray, the northern in Ethiopia's northern region. The material improvements for us is that relatively a large amounts of food aid are being distributed now into northern Tigray. The telecoms and electricity is mostly back. You will recall, for those of you who've been watching Ethiopia, this was largely cut off by the federal government. Also, we've seen the return of banking services to the region, so that's welcome. But there are reasons also to be concerned about whether the peace will hold, and we're really urging the Security Council and also other important allies for Ethiopia to really keep a tight handle on developments there. And there's a real risk of re-escalation if we don't deal with the outstanding challenges that remain, particularly around the full withdrawal of Eritrean troops from there. And then the other sort of conflict, and it will certainly be one that will be a focus on the Security Council, which is the war in Yemen. And although we see opportunities, I think one of our concerns is that it remains an uncomfortable limbo after a truce between the Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized government, when that truce lapsed last October as well. Fighting is mostly still on hold, but the UN brokered negotiations, that could end the conflict. I think we're concerned about the pace of those negotiations. I mean, a key to that, Mr. Vice President, will be the talks that are going on right now between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. And those talks are underway, but they cannot bring the conflict to a close themselves. Any arrangement that is going on between Riyadh and the Houthis, that ignores the interest of many of the anti-Houthis factions, will likely plunge the country into further disarray. And then just finally, for me, Mr. Vice President, I said to you that Crisis Group has been covering the war, covering these 10 conflicts for the last 10 years. And in the 10 years that I've been Africa Program Director and now President of Crisis Group, the one region or the one country that's sort of never been on our list has been the Democratic Republic of Congo or the Great Lakes region. And those of you who are from the region or who watch the Great Lakes politics would have seen the incident that happened last week when Rwandese authorities hit out at the fighter jet, raising alarm bells about regional peace and security there again. And of course, this is a very tense time in terms of diplomacy in the region. It's also a moment where the DRC is expected to go to elections this year. It's a very, we are watching again the rise of proxy war, regional proxy war in a very volatile part of the continent. And we really are sort of worried, given the current state of affairs between DRC and Rwanda, trading accusations over claims that, for example, that the Congolese fighter jet violated Rwandan airspace as well. So this is one conflict to watch, one conflict that we are seriously worried about that can go in the wrong direction. And as you know, an East African military mission minus Rwanda has a mandate to restore calm in Eastern Congo. And the real question mark is whether regional diplomacy will be able to step in to prevent a deterioration of the crisis there. Mr. President, I will stop here and simply just to say that, thank you for asking Crisis Group to present its 10 conflicts. I think the other sort of challenges that we see over the next year is just the heightened humanitarian catastrophe in a number of the conflicts that we're watching, which is why we've got Haiti on the list. We are worried about interstate conflict, which is why we've got Azerbaijan and Armenia on our list. And I think the fate of the Iran nuclear deal, a country that's increasingly isolated, given the protests that are going on in that country, makes us very concerned about the fate of that nuclear deal, which explains why Iran is also on there. But I'll stop there and give the virtual microphone back to you. Thank you very much.